Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 4143. Today's date is July 7, 2026. It's been almost like a night at 10:07 p.m. Okay. So, what exactly happened? Yeah. Today was like a very there are a couple of things that usually is this thing na ki I have kind of like a plan that what do I supposed to do every single day, and I follow that plan. Okay, but today was that I didn't really follow the plan. Okay, what exactly happened? Okay, let me tell you one thing. My plan, then what I should supposed to be follow, and what exactly stuff that I didn't really follow. Okay, so usually I wake up at morning at 7 a.m. Soon as I wake up, I kind of like make little bit of kind of like a simply prepared for breakfast. Okay, and usually at almost like a 8 I kind of like a record artifact. Okay, yeah, like I started recording artifact. After I record artifact, I do my breakfast. Okay, and then after that I kind of like simply sit in front of my desk. Okay, and try to do couple of things. First of all, I have to read two books. My book, okay, my artifact, this is the book that I'm kind of like a made. I have to be read this book. Okay, 1 hour at least. Okay, then after that I have to be read. After I read 1 hour, then I have to be read another book, the Principia of Mathematica, written by Isaac Newton, which is half an hour. Okay, then after that I play micro games, Duolingo, Elevate, Lumosity, Brilliant. Brilliant is a kind of like a things that keep, like I don't really love it. Okay, so I drop it. Brilliant maybe. Okay, I will not gonna kind of like buy the subscription of Brilliant because it doesn't really kind of like yeah, like regarding about the I learn mathematics, I could able to be learn mathematics on Duolingo instead of Brilliant. Brilliant is a like a it's a very overwhelming, and because of it's kind of like they are kind of like offering too much. That's why it's kind of like a very, yeah, whatever. So these are kind of like a micro learning games, micro learning application. Okay, that I kind of like play those games. Then after that I kind of like mop the floor, and then after that I ate my kind of like a showered and kind of like do my lunch. After the lunch I kind of like focus on app development. Okay, continuously doing app development and things and that till almost like a 6:30, and then I went to workout. I do run half an hour. After I run half an hour, I came, I showered. Then after that, I sit in front of my desk, do my work till 10 p.m. After 10 p.m., I kind of like a something. Uh, After I ate my dinner, then I record artifact at after like after 10 p.m. I ate my dinner. After dinner, I record artifact. After record artifact, then I'm really free. Then I usually kind of like a sleep at 11 p.m. Oh yeah. So this is the kind of like a routine that I usually follow every single day. But today I didn't really follow. There are two things that I haven't really done. Okay, I didn't really read my book. Like I should supposed to be read my book 1 hour, but I haven't really read that book. Okay, yeah. Isaac Newton I read. Okay, micro learning games I did. Um, Another thing is that ki I usually record artifact in the morning. I didn't really record artifact, but there is a reason, by the way, because in the morning I try to record artifact. There is a lot of rain actually happening, so I couldn't able to be record artifact because usually I record artifact in the rooftop. Rooftop is a kind of like a my private space. Okay, but because of the rain actually happened, so I couldn't able to be record artifact. Stuff happened. Okay, now then after that, okay, then after that what I did, yeah, like these are the kind of like, and also I didn't really went to workout. Yeah, sorry, I forgot, I didn't really went to workout. It is really essential for me to do workout, but I didn't really went. The reason is that I was kind of like a doing like a app development, and there is a kind of like a process actually happening and like basically I am kind of like adding, like what exactly is this thing now. I build my application, but there is a lot of bug into it. I have to be kind of like a find the bug and resolve the bugs and things and that and that. Now one of the biggest issue is that how do I supposed to find the bug. That is a kind of like one of the biggest thing. Finding a bug is a kind of like a, it's very like a basically is this thing. I have almost like a 200 Kotlin files in my 200, yeah, at least like a 200 Kotlin files in my application, and finding a kind of like a small bug in 200 files in one single code line, it's like, yeah. So basically it's this thing that na ki I need to kind of like figure it out a way to how do I supposed to debug my application. So basically it's this thing I figure it out ki kind of like make sure that ki kind of like a Logcat would be kind of like a much more better, because Logcat is a kind of like a things that ki you could like a basically everything actually happened in the application, every click should supposed to be registered in the Logcat, so that possibly whatever actually error happened or whatever the kind of like a thing happened, it should supposed to be registered. Okay, now problem is that na ki Logcat automatically kind of like register everything, but not everything. Like it kind of like a register kind of like a very couple of things, like a kind of like an essential and things and that, and then also na kind of like the information that you get in the Logcat is kind of like a too much massive and it's cannot able to be read. And even if I try to copy that Logcat and paste it into the kind of like some ChatGPT, it's not really possible, because of that the context window of that ChatGPT is a kind of like almost like a, you cannot put that much amount of thing in one go in ChatGPT. So that is a kind of like a things and error. So I also I wanted that ki Logcat should supposed to be kind of like a assembly that ki as much as clean, so that I would kind of like find my kind of like a debugs, find my errors and things quickly, easily, and kind of like a, I will not gonna kind of like paste that much amount of Logcat because it's a too much. Yeah. So kind of like I kind of like went to ChatGPT, kind of like this is a kind of like a problem. I want my kind of like a Logcat as much as kind of like a better it possible, so that I would kind of like find my debug and kind of like solve the debug and things and that and that. So ChatGPT kind of like give me prompt. I will kind of like using agents to kind of like do it this thing, and it takes so much amount of time. It kind of like went through almost like hundreds of files. Okay, it changed hundreds of file and things and that and that. So yeah, now it just done. Okay, because of this thing, because of this kind of like a process actually happening, it's been actually I started this process for at almost like a 4 p.m. Okay, yeah, it continued till now means like that almost like 8 p.m. Like it takes almost like a 4 hour to kind of like implement everything, every kind of like a code with verification, runtime verification, everything. It take me 4 hour, like almost like a 3 and 4 hour to kind of like implement everything that code. Okay, yeah. Now after the code, I will kind of like I will kind of like find what is actually kind of like a debug and things, and kind of like a fix that whatever the kind of like a bug is actually happened. I will kind of like fix that thing probably. Yeah, there are so many stuff, by the way. But yeah, my application is kind of like somewhat something like good, but still it's not really refined. Okay, yeah. Now there is a kind of like a couple of things I realized that na ki, like let's say WhatsApp is a kind of like a very refined application. You are kind of like a very much confidence to kind of like a, you press the button, things will actually happen. Like you kind of like a press the button, like a add button, and you kind of like a press the kind of like a camera button or kind of like a gallery button, then gallery will gonna open, camera will gonna open. Like you are pretty much confident regarding about that. Okay, yeah, I'm not really confident in my application, because like if I click some sort of button, I'm kind of like a feel that this button might not gonna work and things and that and that. So that is a kind of like a things. Okay, that's kind of like a things, a confidence. I don't really get that confidence. Like I'm kind of like putting a lot of codes and things and that and that and that, but still there is a lot of things to figure it out, because my application is actually goes through a lot of technicality. Like basically, first of all, is that from the kind of like a publishing point of perspective, you have to follow this particular step. Like basically you have to kind of like record the artifact. After the record, you have to listen the artifact for kind of like a 95%. Okay, yeah. Now this particular terminology is a kind of like a very much difficult. Like basically is this thing, if you wanted to kind of like listen your entire artifact for like 95%, then kind of like everything should supposed to be kind of like a measure through 95% of your artifact. As also you could able to be kind of like a forward, kind of like a reverse with a kind of like a 1x 2x 3x or speed, you could able to be do this thing. So there are multiple kind of like a ways to do this kind of like some stuff means like everything is actually tracking till you kind of like actually listen your artifact 95%. This is kind of like a very much, it's a kind of like a publishing studio, by the way, like how this kind of like artifact will kind of like a publishing, everything actually happens. So I have to be code regarding about every button, and it should supposed to be happen very smoothly. And right now my this particular process is not actually happen smoothly. Okay, this kind of like some sort of some sort of amount of things that I have to figure it out. It actually happened like basically the if I press the button things actually happen, but still there are a little bit of refinement should supposed to be happen. Okay, yeah, like I build my application but it's not really refined. Okay, yeah, my next step would be that I would kind of like debug my application. Okay, run test on emulator and kind of like a real device. And after I kind of like realize that okay, I'm confident enough, then I kind of like started recording artifact in my application. Okay, yeah, to kind of like make sure that this is like basically I have to be test this application to myself that this is kind of like a legitly happen, because usually the artifact is actually happen for almost like a half an hour session, and in that half an hour I kind of like a talk and things, and does it kind of like somebody properly work with or not, or whatever kind of like a things happen, like what if kind of like a someone called me in between the recording, then what will gonna happen, does it stop, does it pause, does it whatever it actually happened, I'm not really sure. What if kind of like a battery low, then what will gonna happen, does it kind of like a, I don't know, there are a lot of kind of like a possibility I have to be figured it out. Okay, yeah, I have to be test, and then after that test I kind of like build the confidence. Then the next step, okay, like let me tell you one thing, building application is not a kind of like a hard thing. The hard thing is that publishing and then kind of like a something like there are a lot of kind of like a problem, like basically building application is not a kind of like a one of the toughest part. The toughest part is that how do I supposed to convince people to record artifact. Yeah, but that is a like that's one of the biggest hurdle and one of the kind of like things, but I don't know. Yeah, let's figure it out, whatever. So basically is this thing, what I'm saying is that I didn't really read my book, I haven't really did my workout, I skip my artifact in the morning, and that's why I just kind of like a feel like that right now I should supposed to be record artifact. I have to be, yeah. So yes. Also is this thing, last night I didn't really record artifact. Same is the rain actually happening. Yeah, I like the rain, but the only one thing I didn't really like about the rain is that like it kind of like always interfere with me with artifact while recording artifact. So yeah, that's the kind of like a things. All right, yeah, let's just jump into the question. It's been almost like a 13-minute I kind of like a talking about this shit and kind of like a, all right, yeah, all right, let's jump into the question. Okay, question is, what about misinformation? Oh, okay, that's a really good question. Okay, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? I wanted to build an application called My Artifact. What exactly is this application? When you write the diary every single day, you cannot able to be write the diary the way that you wanted to. The reason is that your thought process are actually much more faster than your writing speed. Your writing speed is actually slow is because of you need a pen, you need a paper, you need a convenience, and even after that you need to put a lot of amount of effort to write your diary. But even after you put a lot of amount of effort, you cannot able to be write the diary, or you cannot able to be print your thoughts. Yeah, and because of this thing, because of it takes so much amount of effort, there are so less amount of people are like there no one is actually writing a diary, like almost negligible at all or no one. Okay, but what if instead of writing a diary, what if we could record a diary, like an audio record a diary? The stuff that you are kind of like listening right now, this is my audio diary. I called it My Artifact episode. My Artifact episode number 4140 37 something, I'm not really sure. Okay, I'm doing this thing for past 11 year. I am doing this thing every single day. Because of writing a diary is a self-reflection process, so as a recording a diary, so as a recording artifact is a self-reflection process. It adds so much amount of value inside of me. the person that I became today, the person that I will become tomorrow, it is because of artifact. The amount of value it add inside of me, I want to share this value. How do I supposed to do that? By building an application. My application is somewhat something like a YouTube platform. In a YouTube, you kind of like upload your video, other people kind of like see your video. Same thing, you actually record your artifact, upload your artifact in artifact platform, other people kind of like listen your artifact. There is only one catch, is that your real name is always kept hidden. Like basically is this thing, my real name is Saurabh Othare, but my artifact handle name would be Prozac 1943 or something else. Before I wanted to build this application, I wanted to aware of all the possible consequences. Okay, so I went to ChatGPT and I kind of like tell my app idea regarding about this and that and suggest me and also kind of like tell me suggest me at least like hundreds of all the possible consequences might gonna happen if I build the application. What might gonna happen? Suggest me hundreds of possible consequences question. ChatGPT kind of like suggests me those hundreds of possible consequences question, and this is one of those question. Now regarding about this question, the question says that what about the misinformation? Okay, yeah. Now first of all, what exactly is this like a misinformation? Okay, yeah. First of all, let's just understand the misinformation and how does it kind of like associate and relate with my application. Okay, a misinformation means like that the information is not complete. Okay, yeah, that is called misinformation. Like basically is it whatever the information that you have, but you have not complete information, you have like a little less of information. Okay, so is it wrong? Well, yeah, it is wrong. Okay, like how is it kind of like something wrong? Okay, let me tell you one thing, that if I'm gonna say I can prove that aliens are exist. Okay, so if I kind of like say, you might kind of say, oh, like are you really like aliens are exist, and then I'm gonna say, yeah, aliens are exist like a 10 billion light year away. Then you might gonna say, oh, then why don't you tell me earlier? Like this is what it is. Like basically is this thing now, if you kind of like provide the half of the information is a kind of like somebody wrong information, or a kind of like it's not a wrong information, it's a kind of like somebody create a chaos information. Like basically is this thing, there is a two kind of like information. One is a none, another is a complete. Okay, yeah. When you provide the half information, that is a wrong. That is not also wrong, that is also kind of like a create a chaos too, because half information is a unbake or improper bake, so that is called kind of like a half information. All right, so basically is this thing, so this is kind of like a misinformation. Okay, or kind of like a not have full information. Do you understand the concept? Oh yeah. Now basically is this thing, the news media or everything, they are kind of like providing the information. Okay, yeah. Whatever they are kind of like providing information, they are providing information through backend structure, like regarding about that they have kind of like a proper evidence. Okay, yeah. Like basically is this thing, when you kind of like provide a news, whatever the information that they will gonna collect, obviously the information will be fragile. Information would be kind of like somebody that you have to be collect and things and that. And when you are collecting information through something, that's something called evidence. Okay, yeah. So basically, like because of like basically you went there, so you have a receipt. So you that receipt is a kind of like a evidence of you went there. Okay, so that is it. So that receipt is a kind of like a became evidence. Now sometimes evidence is also kind of like a somebody very different too, like a sometimes evidence are kind of like a somebody non-living thing, like a receipt or any kind of like a material or whatever the kind of like a things are the evidence, or a human evidence that is called not human evidence. We called it as a kind of like a something that what is actually the legal word for that? Okay, basically what is actually this thing that visual kind of like a things, the person who kind of like a seen the crime, what is actually that particular person says. Wait, let me google. Okay, the person who seen the crime, the PERS person who seen the crime is known as eyewitness. Sorry, yeah, witness, eyewitness, yeah. Okay, yeah, eyewitness. Okay, these are also kind of like a things. The evidence and eyewitness. Okay, so look, basically this thing, the information is kind of like a complete when you have kind of like a evidence. Okay, yeah. Usually evidence are kind of like a somebody a material or kind of like a things or whatever it is, or receipt or kind of like a whatever it is. Okay, yeah, like evidence have kind of like a things. CCTV footage is also kind of like a evidence too. And eyewitness is a kind of like a particular person who literally saw the kind of like a things. Okay, yeah, maybe crime or whatever it is. Okay, I'm kind of like a putting a lot of kind of like a lot of kind of like a legal word, but it's not really that. Eyewitness, I'm a kind of like a particular person who kind of like a see the crime, that is called eyewitness. And the evidence are kind of like a things as a kind of like evidence. Okay, why those are kind of like a really essential? Because those are kind of like a really essential to kind of like a complete the story, complete the information. Okay, yeah. So if you have a information, okay, yeah, that is a half baked information or misinformation or half information. Okay, when you have evidence, when you have information plus evidence plus eyewitness, then that information is a complete information. That information is a complete information. Do you understand? So this is kind of like a stuff. Okay, so basically this thing, like these are kind of like some information are kind of like available. Now every different kind of like information are kind of like have different thought process. Like basically this thing, when you are kind of like when you need a information regarding about current thing. Okay, yeah, like a basically this thing, let's just say a kind of like a prime minister is actually dead. So this kind of like information is a kind of like a current thing. So you need evidence, you need eyewitness, you need a kind of like a lot of things to kind of like verify that this information is kind of like a legit, right, and things and that and that. So basically, when you want a current information, you need eyewitness, you need a kind of like evidence. Alright, what if you need a kind of like information in a information about the kind of like a past history? Okay, so if you want the information about the past history and kind of like exactly right information, then you will kind of like get information very quickly, easily, because whatever actually happened in the past might be written at somewhere or might be kind of like have proper evidence or eyewitness or things and that and that. So this might be kind of like exist. So yeah, so collecting the information in current, it kind of like a very difficult to complete the information. When you try to kind of like capture the information which is actually happened in the past, it takes very less amount of time to know that what is actually happening in the past, because evidence and everything is already kind of like created. You just have to search it, find it, and things and that and that. Okay, and since now today we have a kind of like a AI and things and that, we could able to be research and kind of like find the evidence much more quickly, easily, quickly. Okay, so do you understand? So this is called kind of like simply misinformation. All right, yeah. Now YouTubers are also kind of like provide the information. Okay, they provide the information like basically just a kind of like a particular YouTuber who kind of like a teaching regarding about history or geography or geopolitics and things and that. They also kind of like provide the information, and they also provide the information through facts, through reporting, through research and things and that. Now where this actually come from? We are living in digital world, so basically all the evidence and everything are kind of like assembly stored in digital world. Digital world means like the internet and things and that. We just have to go and search and find the article, kind of like collect the evidence, do the research, and kind of like get entire story. All right, so that is called kind of like assembly that key YouTuber kind of like do this thing. So let me tell you one thing. These are kind of like assembly. Like the one of the most important thing that I want to tell you is that try to tell you the how much kind of like a what is actually the misinformation. Okay, misinformation, half information, things and that. Okay, now if the some particular people who are kind of like providing the misinformation, okay, then you kind of like mention that is a wrong. Okay, so does people not spread misinformation? Well, practically they do. They do spread the misinformation. but very deliberately. Deliberately means like that कि I don't know. Okay, yeah. It's a kind of like a things that na कि every person look at the problem or look at the information very different point of perspective. Okay, very different point of perspective, or maybe his point of perspective. Um, okay, yeah. So I kind of like a watching a video on YouTube platform regarding about something that ki like a what is at least this thing? Ha. Okay. So a couple of days ago, I watched a video. Abhinayu. Abhinayu is a kind of like a YouTuber, and who makes a video about geopolitics. Okay. Yeah. Now they are kind of like a make a video regarding about that ki in 2026, specifically June, the Europe is a kind of like a burning hot 41 degrees Celsius. Like a Europe is a kind of like a thing which is a kind of like always been less than 20-25 degrees Celsius, but this year it kind of like a went up to 40 degrees Celsius, which is never actually happened. Like basically for almost like a decade they kind of like experiencing this much amount of heat. Now because of this much amount of heat, their entire infrastructure like a Europe is a kind of like a built for kind of like a cold weather. Their homes are kind of like a meant to be stored heat, not kind of like a somebody trap heat, not to kind of like a somebody for cold winter and things and that. So basically this thing, the European people are kind of like a very like a burning hot, like they are kind of like a literally burning, like they don't have really AC condition, nothing really at all. Okay, yeah. So this kind of like actually happened. So Abhinayu is also, it's a news by the way, and the kind of like Abhinayu is a kind of like a providing the information. Now there is a one thing I realized. This is kind of like a basically is this thing na ki this is a kind of like a information is a very like a very logical information. Okay, yeah, because of the kind of like assembly. Beneath the Europe there is a kind of like Africa, there is a kind of like a Sahara. Sahara is a kind of like a biggest desert on the planet, and whatever the kind like because of the trade winds, suddenly kind of like a wind kind of like a went upward to the kind of like a direction of Europe. So that's why kind of like a Europe get hotter. Okay, yeah. So it's a very logical thing. Okay, yeah. But Abhinayu is a kind of like a, they change the storytelling in a such a way that very emotional, very kind of like a very thing that they started comparing things with the kind of like assembly that ki like India and Europe and things and that, and also kind of like I don't know, yeah, it's a, they are kind of like a talking about the, like they are kind of like a telling the story with much more emotional point of perspective, and that is a kind of like a things like a basically this na, I don't know, I might be kind of like a sound so wrong, but I realize that na ki like I'm not really that much emotional person, or maybe I'm emotional person, but when I try to consume the information I need a logic, I need a kind of like a things that ki okay, this actually happened. Okay, yeah. Every single time try to compare, every single time try to put the emotional angle into it. Okay, some people might gonna convince, I'm not gonna convince, yeah, like whatever. Okay, but it's just like that. Now I realize that, and Abhinayu is not just kind of like a making that video. Abhinayu is always kind of like a try to push the content in kind of like a much more emotional context point of perspective, which is kind of like a their way of kind of like a creating the content, which is also kind of like a really good. Like I'm not kind of like a try to judge their content, which is really great, but it's mostly kind of like an emotional piece of content. Okay, let's just go through kind of like a very emotional point of perspective and things, and that they also kind of like tell you the emotional context and things and that, which is like a right. Some people might gonna convince. I am not that much convinced, but I also kind of like a love the way they are kind of like a way that they kind of like a creating the content and things and creating the kind of like things, whatever. So what I was kind of like a try to tell you. Okay, yeah. So basically this thing, does Abhinayu kind of like a spread the misinformation? No, they not. So basically, but it does feel like misinformation. What do you mean by that? Okay, example. Let's just say you have a kind of like information, okay, yeah, and you kind of like somebody the sharing such a information that you kind of like a that might gonna add a value in you, or that might gonna kind of like a add a profit for you. Okay, yeah. Example, let's just say I kind of like in my information I kind of like simply type a title, a kind of like a Europe is burning in a kind of like a hot capital letter, in a kind of like a simply bold capital letter. Okay, yeah. Europe is burning and things and that, which is very eye catchy or very kind of like a things. Okay, yeah. Now this is kind of like a thing, it kind of like a drags so many people of attention and things and that, because Europe is never really kind of like a meant to be kind of like a burning and things and that, but because of Europe is burning, people are dying and things, these are kind of like a title and things which is kind of like a very eye catchy, very kind of like a bold, kind of like a bold capital letter, kind of like a telling you that ki just look at me and things and that. Okay, yeah. Now the kind of like a reason behind it is that ki what exactly happened, the kind of like a reason they didn't really mention, the reason they actually mentioned, but kind of like a very small letter, like a very complex thing. Like, do you understand na? Like a basically this thing, what they wanted to sell, they wanted to sell a kind of like a story that kind of like a people will kind of like a drag the attention. Okay, yeah. And they are not try to tell you why, or they will kind of like a tell you why, but kind of like a very kind of like a very kind of like a very small letter, or very kind of like a very less enthusiasm way. Okay, yeah. Not just kind of like every YouTuber does, but every news media does too. Okay, they kind of like a try to sell you such a value that kind of like a simply drag you attention and things and that, like debates and things, and kind of like a one minister actually kind of like a fighting with another minister. There are kind of like a how debates and things. Debates is also really good, like I'm not gonna say that thing, but basically this thing, once the debate is a kind of like a should supposed to be happen healthy, like a talk about such a thing that kind of like a something matter to things, not kind of like a one minister kind of like a say like that fuck you, and another minister kind of like a say fuck you, and say fuck you too. Like what exactly is this thing, who will gonna watch? There are so many people are kind of like watching this thing because negativity sells, my brother. Okay, yeah. So this is what it is. Okay, whatever. So this is kind of like a lot of stuff. So basically, does news media company or kind of like any kind of like a media people, they are kind of like sharing the misinformation? No, they are not sharing misinformation. Misinformation, as I mentioned, not complete information. They are sharing the complete information, but they are kind of like making sure what kind of like information that viewer should supposed to be known, or viewer should supposed to be kind of like a get, and what kind of like information is that key not really important, so kind of like a highlight them little less. It's that like a Europe is burning, highlight them more, like a red bold letter. Yeah, red bold capital letter. Reason, yeah, just kind of like just normal, no less highlight, or maybe nothing really at all. Yeah, so like this is what it is. This is what kind of like a information is actually flows through. Now, why does do that? Why does they do that? Because it create attention. Let me tell you one thing, we are living in attention world, dude. We are living in attention world where people are kind of like always been kind of like somebody want to know what is at least this thing. Everyone kind of like a drag you attention and things and that. Okay, so that's why they are kind of like doing this thing, and because of this thing, misinformation happen more. Even if they are kind of like providing entire information, still misinformation actually happen. Why? Because most of the people didn't really watch the entire YouTube video, didn't really watch the kind of like a sit in front of the kind of like a news and kind of like watch the things and that. They will kind of like a stay for kind of like a couple of minutes. If they kind of like watch it, if they kind of like feel like entertained, they will kind of like watch the maybe kind of like a video, YouTube video, or maybe kind of like things, or maybe they skip the channel or whatever it is. So that's kind of like a thing. So okay, yeah, because of everyone are kind of like fighting the attention, everyone are trying to kind of like provide you such a information that kind of like a drag the attention. And even if that information is kind of like a misinformation, they kind of like tell you that key like this is kind of like entire information, but that entire information is like always been kept hidden. Because of that key, our attention is kind of like never really went there and kind of like see that thing and stuff like that. Okay, and some people kind of like put the emotional angle, some people put the kind of like a personal story and things and that. So yeah, so basically is this thing, does misinformation is wrong? Yeah, it is wrong. Is misinformation are kind of like a spread by media company? Well, technically no, but intentionally yes. Technically no, they are not spreading the misinformation, but intentionally or emotionally yeah, because they are kind of like understand what sell, what not sell. So yeah. Now this is kind of like a story about the okay, okay. Now let's talk about the artifact. Now artifact is a kind of like a platform where user are kind of like a record the artifact. Like right now, I am kind of like a recording artifact. So am I kind of like a sharing misinformation, or kind of like a somebody that? Obviously yes. What do you mean? The stuff that I'm talking right now till now is misinformation. Well, from my point of perspective, it is the entire information, but from your point of perspective, it is a misinformation. Okay. Okay, what the fuck is that? Okay, if you not really understand, okay, let me tell you one thing. What is exactly misinformation? As I already mentioned, not how entire information. Okay, yeah. Let's just say information complete may be kind of like a simply 100%. Okay, yeah. Now I am thinking that I have entire information, so I'm telling the information with full confidence and things and that and that. So I am providing full information. So am I spreading misinformation? No, I'm spreading the full information. Now let's just say a kind of like a particular person who is kind of like a bit more experienced regarding about that particular field, he might gonna realize that, dude, you kind of like a share misinformation. Why? Because there are kind of like a things that you don't really know. Example, let's just say kind of like a see that key, I will gonna talk about the like a quantum physics. I will gonna talk about this and that and that and that and that kind of like things. The quantum physics is kind of like a really cool, really crazy. Like there is a kind of like a physics is not kind of like a really work over there, stuff and stuff like that. I talk about that stuff. Okay, yeah. Now basically I talk about this thing in artifact. Now that artifact is kind of like a listened by a kind of like a actual kind of like a physicist who kind of like a work on quantum physics. And that particular person said, dude, the stuff that you kind of like mentioned in the artifact, that is completely wrong, because there are so many things that you completely knew it, you completely not knew it. So what is actually this thing? So what I'm trying to tell you, from my point of perspective, I am sharing the entire information that I know regarding about the quantum physics. Okay, yeah. But the particular person who kind of like a judge my artifact is a kind of like a simply a particular person who is a physicist who knew the entire information regarding about the quantum physics. And because of the way that I kind of like say, I'm kind of like a giving my 100%, but the user kind of like a realize that, or kind of like a other person or physicist realize that the information that I told you told record in the artifact is a kind of like a little less, is little less means like that misinformation. Okay, yeah. So the problem is not about the misinformation, the problem is about who will decide the misinformation. Okay, yeah. Because every person have a kind of like a little information. Okay, yeah. Every person have a kind of like little information, and they are kind of like sharing that little information, and they are kind of like saying this thing, I have full information, I am not kind of like somebody giving the misinformation, because they are kind of like sharing the whatever the information that they have. But that is a very little information. Okay, yeah. So that is very little information. So that little information is a kind of like a misinformation. So every artifact is a artifact or misinformation artifact. Okay, yeah. But why? Well, I am not doing any research. I don't really have script in front of me. Okay, yeah. It's raw, it's unfiltered. I am telling from my perspective, I am telling from my experience, I'm telling from whatever the kind of like a world that I know, I'm telling from my point of perspective. And that is the kind of like a core thing. I am not reading the script. Artifact is meant to be kind of like a share the whatever the stuff that I kind of like have. And obviously that artifact is a misinformation. So every artifact that you are kind of like a listening, mine or every artifact that you might kind of like listen, the people are misinformation. Okay, so should you consume that misinformation? Well, technically is this thing that you have to understand. Okay, yeah, you have to understand what exactly is this thing. Now if I'm kind of like a talk about this particular stuff now, it's a very complicated. Let's just say I mention about, like I am recording artifact regarding about the quantum physics. Obviously whatever the information that I have is almost less, because I am not physicist. Okay, yeah. And I have kind of like whatever the information that I have, I'm telling that information 100%, but my information is kind of like a very less. So obviously it's a kind of like a misinformation, right? If I record the artifact, someone might gonna listen, it's a misinformation, right? Yeah. Do you really think that people will kind of like talk about the kind of like assembly quantum physics in artifact? Well, they will, they might, they wanted to, like obviously is this thing. But the problem is that artifact is a kind of like a thing is that usually people are kind of like express whatever they have thoughts inside of it. Like basically this thing, just understand, artifact is a misinformation, Does people spread misinformation in artifact? Yes. Does I spread misinformation in artifact? Yes. Do you want to believe that? It's up to you. Yeah, it's up to you, because like basically there is no sense at all. Like if I'm kind of like a let them, if I'm kind of like a try to convince, do not share the artifact without kind of like a misinformation or not have the information, then it doesn't really make sense at all. Then it became kind of like a something like basically what is really the core thing of the artifact. The core thing of artifact that key, you can freedom to have express anything that you wanted to say, anything, whatever the stuff that you wanted to say. Artifact is actually giving that freedom, and obviously that freedom is a kind of like a fragile, that freedom is a kind of like a, let's just saying that key, not really right, misinformation. Okay, so basically is this thing na ki, if you are kind of like a, like basically right now I'm kind of like a recording artifact and things and that, whatever the kind of like a information that I said, is it right? Well, basically from my point of perspective, yes, it is right. Okay, yeah, you have to decide that you want to believe it or not. Okay, you have to believe it or not. Okay, yeah, because let me tell you one thing na, artifact is a kind of like a personal thing, dude. You are kind of like a listening other people thoughts, and thoughts are messy, raw, unfiltered. Like there are so many kind of like a stupid shit are actually available when you kind of like a listen other people artifact. Dude, there are so many things, it's kind of like a not right, so many things, but that is a kind of like a really beautiful in itself, because it's a kind of like a, it's a kind of like a comes. Okay, let me tell you one thing. Okay, humans are imperfection. Okay, yeah, humans are like, we are like you, me, everyone, we are humans are, we are very imperfect people, we are not perfect. Okay, yeah, and perfect is a kind of like you can't define, because perfect is a kind of like a non-existence, because perfect is a kind of like a, it's not really possible to be perfect, because when you consider as a perfect, that means it's nothing, because nothing is a perfect, right? Because nothing, like I don't know, if I want to talk about the perfect is a kind of like a really long stuff I will gonna talk about later, whatever it is. I'm saying is that na ki we are kind of like a something, we are fragile, we are like a kind of like a, we are kind of like a have little bit of kind of like a assembly imperfection. What is actually imperfection? Imperfection means like that na ki we are not correct, or we are maybe kind of like a something, some sort of amount of flaws. When we do not have flaws, we became plastic, we became like a like nothing. Okay, like what makes us human? Like what makes us human? Like you, me, what makes us human? What is at least this thing? Okay, yeah, we are try to learn things, and when we are try to learn things or know things or understand things, we understand things by slowly, not to learn everything by at once. Like basically it's this thing that na ki, like I kind of like somebody in my kind of like a second standard, I have kind of like not second standard, like maybe fifth sixth standard, I have kind of like a somebody lesson regarding about the gravity, and Isaac Newton kind of like a discovered the gravity, and they told me that ki kind of like a Newton was kind of like a sitting in the kind of like a somebody like sitting on the tree, like in the tree, and kind of like apple is actually falling head, and kind of like a Newton kind of like a discovered, oh, apple fall in his head, like a slow gravity and things and that. That does not happen. I am reading the Mathematica book, okay, huh? And this is never mentioned. Who told that story? I don't know. And they kind of like telling this story in telling this kind of like a some lesson in a kind of like a some fourth or fifth standard of book. Okay, yeah. So does our entire education system are kind of like a doing misinformation? No, they are not kind of like a telling the misinformation. Like basically is this thing na, a kind of like a 10-year-old people, why does he understand the centrifugal force? How does that particular person will understand the kind of like a geometry? How does that particular person understand the kind of like a equilibrium law? How does he understand the kind of like a Kepler laws? How did he understand the kind of like a, how does kind of like a planet moves and things and that? Okay, kind of like a 10-year boy will kind of like overwhelmed by all the information and things and that. And if the kind of like if they all the provide the information by the Newton is kind of like written on the Principia. No, they will kind of like provide such a information that that 10-year-old boy could able to be consumed, and how that boy will kind of like consume that information through a story. A Newton is a kind of like a sitting beside the kind of like a tree, and kind of like apple fall in head, and kind of like they will say, oh, apple fall head, so gravity invented and things, and that they try to sell a story, dude. That is the kind of like a things. Okay, so misinformation, does it exist? Yeah. Misinformation is a kind of like exist by people, or kind of like created by people. Yeah. Is misinformation is a kind of like a wrong? Yeah. Is misinformation is a kind of like a something right? No. Then why does people do that? Because there is no choice, because we are already kind of like a simply imperfect people. Every person is kind of like a learn through kind of like a simply very different point of perspective. Not everyone kind of like a downloading the file and kind of like understand everything. No, definitely not. Like basically is this thing in my kind of like a simply like a 11 standard or kind of like a 8 standard, I have kind of like a trigonometry. I learn sine, cos, theta, tan, theta, whatever the fuck theta, what is this thing? I still don't know why I did learn that thing. And after all those years, right now I'm kind of like reading this book, I realize that, oh, this is what it came from. Like this what is it? Like this is what kind of like a geometry. This is what it is. What is that? Sine, cos, theta, tan, whatever the fuck that was. It was kind of like a matter, dude. And at that time I was like, what the fuck that I'm reading right now? Okay, yeah. Like basically this thing, Pythagoras theorem, dude. You actually learn this thing in kind of like a assembly that key 6-7 standard. Okay, yeah. I'm not really sure about this thing, 6-7 standard, maybe something like that, middle school, high school. You actually learn that Pythagoras theorem. Okay, yeah. Now have you asked this question to yourself? Why the fuck Pythagoras kind of like invented this theorem? Have you ever asked this question? No, you are kind of like in the okay, I have this kind of like question will become in my exam, so I would kind of like prepare this formula. And yeah, so let's just say a square plus b square plus c square is equal to, no sorry, a square plus b square is equal to a square plus ab plus b square. Oh, what the fuck that formula, dude? It's just kind of like a really fucked up. I still don't know, but whatever it is. Okay, do you understand? Humans are fragile. Humans are imperfection. Humans are not perfect, and that makes us human, dude. That makes us human. Misinformation is a people can do this thing. Anyone can do this thing. And basically this thing is this information is like, okay, let me tell you one thing. I am a kind of like a news anchor. Obviously, it is my responsibility to not to share misinformation. Why? Because I am a news anchor. I have responsibility to kind of like tell the real story with every facts, evidence, eyewitness, whatever it is. Okay, because because I'm the kind of like assembly the news anchor. If I'm kind of like assembly a lawyer, it is my responsibility kind of like show the evidence, show the eyewitness, show the kind of like a formula, show the everything. Okay, yeah. Like basically it's this thing na कि when the situation came serious, you shouldn't supposed to show the misinformation. You have to tell the entire story. But when the kind of like a stake is not that high, like let's just say kind of like a YouTube video or recording artifact, yeah, you could do that thing, whatever you wanted to say. Yeah, but dude, like if the people who are kind of like sharing the misinformation through very wrong way, then what will gonna happen? Okay, let me tell you one thing. Let's just say a particular person who kind of like a record artifact regarding about that, he says that aliens is kind of like abducted by him, abducted, and he kind of like went into the kind of like alien spaceship, and he kind of like mentioned that he saw the alien spaceship and that and that and that and that and that. Completely misinformation, completely false information, completely stupid information, right? Now ask this question to yourself: does people believe that? Well, some people will, some people not. Okay, some people will, some people not. Okay, yeah. So basically what is actually this thing? Does misinformation impact on a people? Yeah. Does misinformation kind of like impact wrong in the world? Yes too. Basically this thing, does misinformation should be supposed to be stopped spreading? Well, we can't do that thing, because it's just like that na ki, I don't know, dude. Like basically this thing, if the one particular person is kind of like a recording artifact regarding about this that key kind of like aliens are kind of like a kidnap him and kind of like things happen. I would not gonna believe that whoever the person kind of like talking and he kind of like showing me this evidence, I will not gonna believe that. Why? Because I understand things that what is actually right, what is actually things, and that and that and that. Right? So that is what it is now. Like basically existing now, misinformation are actually exist everywhere. It's up to you. Do you want to believe it or not? Okay, yeah. but like still na, it's just kind of like a things that ki probably I don't know, but I am completely saying this thing that ki I'm still kind of like like stuff I'm kind of like say this thing like basically this thing that ki whatever the stuff that I say regarding about the misinformation till now, okay, is kind of like a simply this thing that na ki is not right or not, like it's like basically this thing na, whatever the stuff that I kind of like tell you is still misinformation because I didn't really knew it. I didn't really knew the how does people will kind of like a record artifact, because there are so many things will kind of like a people utilize for artifact for, I don't know, yeah, like it's just like that na ki when I asked this question it kind of like a like I was kind of like a thinking that ki like misinformation like what, like does people miss, like basically I asked this question to myself, like dude, the if the people are kind of like sharing the misinformation then chaos will gonna happen, right? But then I realized that na ki dude, artifact is a kind of like a things that people should supposed to be record the whatever the stuff that they wanted to record. Then if they are kind of like sharing the misinformation, then what's wrong in that thing? Or like what's wrong, like what's kind of like a things, I am not really sure, because let me tell you one thing now, I didn't really see the consequences. Okay, yeah, because right now I'm recording artifact, I am recording artifact for past 11 year. Okay, yeah, till now no one kind of like listen the artifact, like literally no one. Yeah, okay, so basically is this thing na ki I don't know what kind of like a consequences will gonna happen um, if I build the application, and what kind of like a people will kind of like share things and that and that and that. So I don't know about that. Okay, so regarding about kind of like a providing any kind of like answer right now regarding about misinformation, I am not really sure about this thing because I don't know the consequences. Okay, yeah. Because let me tell you one thing na ki usually the problem face like when the solution actually happen, when the problem actually exists. If I don't know the problem, if I don't know the gravity, if I don't know the kind of like what exactly happened with the misinformation, then how do I supposed to kind of like fix that thing? Or maybe if the misinformation actually happened, I don't know how do I supposed to kind of like I don't know, like right now na, regarding about this particular topic, I don't really have any proper information regarding about any proper, yeah, knowledge, information, nothing really at all. Okay, yeah, I think that na ki maybe a kind of like a future me will kind of like somebody understand things much more better. But right now, this is just information, I think. But another thing is that now artifact is a kind of like a somebody existing a platform where you could able to be say anything that you want. If I kind of like allow them people to kind of like not to share the not to kind of like spread the misinformation things and that, then it's a very hard to do this thing because it's an artifact. People kind of like talk things. Okay, yeah, so yeah, whatever. Oh boy, I've been recording for almost like a 52-minute, whatever. So this is it. This is I have to be end here. All right, and yeah, thank you.